So Ayn Rand is a hugely controversial figure, and most people know her as the author of the novels I mentioned, The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged being the most famous. And she was a very successful novelist. And that was this is a surprise to many people at the time because they thought her books were too intellectual. And since then, it's a rebuke to the many people who think she's not important or she's like a fad, and many people thought. But in fact, I think so. Her story is she was born in Russia, and she saw the beginnings of the Russian Revolution, and she left Russia in 1926. She came to the U.S. She was able to stay here, but her career since she was, I think, 7 or 8 was she wanted to be a writer. She wanted to tell stories. And she came here, her first work was, I think, in Hollywood wardrobes, and then she got to write scripts or be a reader, and she worked her way. She wrote some scripts, she edited scripts. Eventually, that led her to being able to write a play and a novel and several novels. And what happened is that, as she describes it herself, in the course of trying to write the stories she wanted to write, the kind of characters and heroes that she thought this is what is possible, she found that she was at odds with the moral, philosophic views out in the culture. She said, I can't write the kind of heroes just taking for granted the same kind of views people hold. And that led her to develop her own thinking, her philosophic approach in a very elaborate way, to the point where she wrote Atlas Shrugged, which is an incredibly philosophical theme in the book. And as a result of that, she developed a philosophic view of life, and that became her sort of explicit philosophy. So she was both a novelist and a philosopher, and she didn't see any clash between those two things. She thought they go together, and it was for her goals, the kind of characters and larger-than-life heroes she wanted to project. She had to develop a clarity about her own philosophic thinking. So she became a phenomenon. I mean, in her own lifetime, she would give speeches, she would write, she was on TV. If you guys remember Johnny Carson, she was on his show. She went on Donahue. And when she gave public speeches, one of the venues she went to frequently in Boston, the Ford Hall Forum, she went there, I think, 20 times over her career. People would line up around the block to get in and see her because she was a cultural presence. What she had to say was hugely controversial. It still is controversial. And although she's been dead since 1982, she's still a presence in the sense that her ideas live on. And the Ayn Rand Institute, where I work, our mission is to help people encounter her ideas and learn more about them. But she's been really influential, I think, more so than people realize. And I'd like more people to find out about her views. So I think there's value to be gained in engaging with them, whether they agree or not.
Yeah.
She was, I think, if there's a theme in her work, she was an absolutist about reason. And in terms of the value perspective, it was the life of the individual is sacrosanct, it's inviolable. And that's just, if you think about, she was there and she lived through some of the early years of the communist regime in Russia, and she saw practically what it meant to live under a collectivist system and how that destroys human life. That was one of the themes of her first novel, We the Living, is the way in which a collectivist society destroys those who want to live most, those who want to live by their own judgment. And she was sort of the best advocate, I think, for reason and for individualism that we've had, as far as I know, in the contemporary world. So that's the sort of an overview of who she is and what she's done. Wow.
So what were the ideas? I mean, how did this concept of individualism flourish into the entire institute that it is today?
Sure. So, as I said, she was an individualist. What she took that to mean is, your life is yours. You own it. You owe no duties to other people or to God. She was an atheist. And her philosophy is entirely secular. There's no religion in it. And it's your life, so the good is to live the best life you can as an individual. And the moral guidance that she offers, her ethics, is your self-interest is a way to get to happiness. That is what produces happiness. Now, how to think about your self-interest. And she has a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, which makes people's hair stand on end.
Yeah.
And I think there's a deliberate intention behind that. What she says is that to conceive of your self-interest as a real effortful activity. You have to think about it. It's a reason-based approach. And it does not mean the conventional idea of selfishness, which is be a jerk, run roughshod over the people, steal, get away with whatever you can. That's not at all in your self-interest, according to her view. To define your self-interest is to find productive work, a career, what you're passionate about, and to do it in a way that recognizes other people's freedom to do the same thing. That you can't violate their freedom in pursuit of your goals. It has to be mutually compatible. So it's individualist in terms of its ethics. And then politically, it's, as I've suggested, that politically she thought a good society is one that lets the individual live according to their judgment, their rational judgment, and pursue the goals and be free to act on their goals as best they can while respecting the freedom of other people to do exactly the same thing. So it's a society where we trade value for value. We don't sacrifice oneself to other people, and we don't expect other people to sacrifice for us. We trade. You gain from it, I gain from it. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. That's the goal that you should have. Now, obviously, people go wrong, people make mistakes, people do bad things, and in her view, the proper role of government, she thinks government, and this is in contrast to a lot of people who are in the so-called liberty movement, who are against government. They're anarchists. But I
was going to ask, is there a level of anarchy to this philosophy?
No. In fact, her view is that a proper government is a necessary good, not a necessary evil, a necessary good, if it's the right kind of government. And that means one that is limited strictly to the protection of individual rights. If it does that, to the extent that it does it, that's a proper government. And it's bounded and limited to a set of functions. It means you need a good police force, you need an objective courts, a rule of law system, you need a military to protect you from foreign threats, and that's about it. I mean, her view is that she puts it as she's for laissez-faire capitalism, and not what we have today, which is a mixture of some freedom, some capitalism, and some regulation, a lot of regulation, and a lot of violations of freedom that are permitted and enforced by the government. So she's for capitalism, total laissez-faire capitalism, which rules out a lot of things that we have in today's world, which makes her even more controversial. It means there's no place for Medicaid or Medicare or universal health care. There's no place for government in schooling even.
She believes complete free market.
Yeah, so the way she put it was a complete separation between state and economics for the same reasons as you should have a complete separation between state and church. So both on the intellectual side of things, you need the government out of ideas, and economically material realm, you need the government out of production, out of people's lives and their ability to live and produce and develop and innovate. So that gives you kind of the picture of her political views. It's important, it's worth stressing that for her, the politics and the economics for which she's viewed as, that's one of the reasons she's famous. She's known as a pro-capitalist, and a lot of people hate her for that. But for her, the capitalism piece was a consequence, a derivative, or an effect of having a proper society, one that protects the individual, one recognizing that the individual is a rational being. So for her, she used to say, I'm for capitalism because I'm for individualism, and I'm for the individual because I'm an egoist in morality, and I'm an egoist because I'm for reason. And if you understand what reason is and how important it is to human life, that it's the source of values of human production and innovation and all the good things we have in the world, if you understand that, then you understand why society has to be shaped towards a capitalist model. So for her, there's a whole philosophic stack, a whole philosophic development, a sequence of ideas that leads to that kind of political vision. And it all starts with what kind of society is right for the man at his best, or mankind at his best. Woman, men, obviously, we take those under the same heading. And that is the rational being, the kind of creator and producer, the thinker and the creator.
How would that work with the different levels of rationality, if you will? Because like within this philosophy, could you argue that one person's version of what's rational is different than another person's of what's rational? For example, I would assume that you and I think like murder is wrong. What if there's someone who feels like there could be a rational justification for that?
So I think rationality is objective. It's a fact that we can agree upon. And people might try to rationalize what they do and say, oh, I was being rational. But I think we can sort those things out. So what is wrong with murder? Murder is the violation of someone's freedom. That's violating their life, their right to life and their liberty. That's wrong. There's nothing rational about that. There are in the law, now there are cases in the law where there's lesser crimes than murder, right? And it has to do with the person's intention and the situation. There's accidental killing and so on. But what we can clearly separate out is there's certain behaviors that are rational and certain behaviors that are rational. And what the government's purpose is to leave us free to be rational. Even though obviously we know people can choose, they have free will, they can do irrational things. And that's the place of the government to protect us from criminals and exploiters and all manner of irrationality.
Murders.
Yeah, murders obviously is a kind of, and there's a whole range of crimes obviously where we can define it as it's a crime because someone's freedom is violated, someone's rights are infringed, not only their physical property or their own body or their life, but intellectual property, right? There's patents and copyrights, and those are hugely important, and it's part of government's responsibility to protect that. And so it's not rational to steal someone's copyrighted work. It's not rational to pirate a movie. There's no defense for that in my view.
I see. Yeah, so that would make more sense, because that's admittedly all I've really heard about the Ayn Rand philosophy is this kind of self-interest, but kind of I've heard it from like a radical set. So that's always been kind of my questions for that. And I'm just trying to think, sitting right here, how that would work in terms of the smaller things, maybe not murder, but just being nice to your neighbor. I guess there is, if it wasn't just maybe someone's personality is to just be nice, sure, but even if you're not, there is a selfish benefit in being nice to your neighbor. Maybe it makes for a more peaceful life every day.
For sure.
Maybe you need something from them someday, which again sounds selfish, but ultimately that's better than being
But notice the way you put that. It's interesting because part of what we're discussing right now is what does her view of selfishness really mean, and how is it compatible with conventional views of selfishness? So is it wrong that my relationship with my neighbor is mutually beneficial? Like I gain something from it and they gain something from it and we're both happy for it. Is that bad? I don't think so. I mean, and I regard that as a selfish relationship. I really like my neighbors. I'm nice to them. I hope they think that. And they're nice to me. And that's how people form friendships. This is how you have relationships and romantic relationships. And I have children. I love them. And it's entirely selfish. And it's not because I think I'm doing it for their sake. It's I want to have children. I love raising them. I love seeing them grow. I gain a lot of personal satisfaction and emotional value from it. And I think there's a whole range of things that people regard as, oh, that can't be selfish. Like you have to do it. The only way you could do it is if you're being selfless. Like one of the big ones is, well, love is selfless. Like it's just really not at all true. It's not love if you have no interest in the person that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So there's tension in people's conventional views of what is selfish and what isn't. And there's what Ayn Rand is pushing people to do is to rethink their assumptions. Like, why is it bad if I'm creating Apple, let's say. I'm Steve Jobs. I wish I were, right? And I'm doing it because I
not
want...
Right now.
No, not right now. But in the past, right? So I want to do it because I love the work and I want to create a company that revolutionizes the industry. I do it because that's what I want. That's my vision. I'm not doing it because I'm serving these people. That's a part of the process. It's part of the transaction. I'm creating products people want to buy. I can tell you how many Apple computers I wanted to buy. Steve Jobs make them really, really attractive. But he didn't do it to serve me. He did it because that's the kind of company he wanted to build. And I think that's true in every career, in every role, in every relationship. If it's a healthy one, you're doing it because you believe rationally that you're gaining something from it, whether it's a material gain like money or you're growing your company in some other way, you're building market share, or emotional or spiritually, to put it kind of in sort of non-material terms. There's a spiritual value that you gain from having a best friend, from having a big circle of friends, from having a good relationship with your neighbor, from treating people that just strangers in the street. Like you treat them with benevolence in the sense that, well, you assume the best until you have reason to think otherwise. And that is a huge part of what it means to be selfish, is you think about what is the value here for my life. And Ayn Rand's conception of selfishness, it's important to stress, it's not a momentary or a kind of in the moment benefit. It's a lifelong perspective. It's a long range vision of what does it really mean to have a life? What I want in my life, a long range view of that. What's compatible with it and what isn't. And for her, the standard is your life. It's an objective thing. There's things we know will kill you, and there's things that will make your life better. And that gives you a black and white, night and day kind of standard. Now, applying it in your life takes work and effort. It's not an automatic thing, and it's certainly not easy. I mean, in the sense that you need to think about, is this the right career path for me? Should I take this new project? Is it going to lead me in the path I want to do?
It's so hard. It's such hard work to be selfish.
It is. And that's the irony, because the irony is when I talk to people about selfishness and Ayn Rand's view of it, they'll say, well, everyone's selfish. It's a natural thing, right? It's automatic. Like, you just, part of what they think morality is about is reining in your appetites.
Yeah.
But that's not a true picture of human nature. I think a true picture of human nature is people have free will, and they can choose to pursue goals that they think rationally are in their interest, or they can sort of let go of the reins of their life and just kind of bump around and find things. Sometimes they're more rational about their choices, sometimes they're not. Accidental things happen, or people make choices for them, or they influence them. It's all kinds of ways in which people go wrong. And there's also very clear cases of people who are deliberately selfless. They do things that are self-harmful knowingly. So I think it's just not psychologically true that people are always automatically selfish. That's just not the right conception of human nature. And I think Ayn Rand's answer to that is, yes, you should be selfish. Here's what it looks like. Here are the principles and virtues to live by. Activate your mind. And that is an achievement. I mean, this is the means to happiness, and you can attain it if you choose to think and make the right kind of decisions.
You've been mentioning capitalism. In this context, could you make the argument that capitalism is a selfish idea? In that, just thinking, you said Steve Jobs, I'm thinking of, most businesses and entrepreneurs. A lot of the times, maybe some of them are doing it because they have some idea they think can revolutionize the world and change the lives for millions of people. Or there's a lot but within that, there is I want to start this business. I want to be the one to do this. I want funds. I want this. I have this idea that I want to get out there. So just thinking right now, there is kind of a selfish aspect to this that you're saying is not necessarily a bad thing.
I think it's a good thing. Yeah, I would say it's the best feature of capitalism from this perspective is that it enables individuals to act on their best judgment and innovate and create and produce and benefit from it and keep the rewards of that work, and without limits, in effect, to grow and raise a society to the heights that we've reached today, where we have the kind of technology that was undreamable 100 years ago. We have kind of conveniences that we take for granted that the first billionaires couldn't imagine ever paying for because it didn't exist. So capitalism is the system, when it's allowed to function, that enables people to pursue their own self-interest, and that's a good thing. And that's one of the reasons people are already uncomfortable with capitalism, because they recognize that people are driven by profits. Well, why is it bad to be driven by profits? Well, I think it's a good thing, because profits lead you to have to create new things that are amazing, like the iPhone, right? Or cars, or airplanes, or any kind of the internet, right? The kind of technology that we've seen blossom in the last 20 years. Now, it's important to just make a huge distinction here, which is we don't have capitalism according to Ayn Rand's definition.
I wanted to ask you, there's laissez-faire capitalism, and then what you say we have today.
Yeah. So what we have today in America, I think, is what she described as a mixed economy. And the mixture is there's a significant amount of political and economic freedom that people are able to produce, and there's a huge commercial, like America is this dynamo of free enterprise. But what we don't recognize, people don't appreciate, is that there's massive regulation, massive controls over the kind of decisions that business people and companies what they can do. And then on top of that, there is government institutions and agencies that what Ayn Rand would regard as they're not part of government's proper function. And these are the sort of welfare programs and entitlement programs that we know and people have come to love, and which I think is not a good thing because it gives them a vested interest in diminishing the role of freedom in society. So this is an issue Ayn Rand wrote about at length, and it was an aspect of her book Atlas Shrugged. What happens in this kind of society is you get at least basically two kinds of business people. There are people who are motivated by creation and pursuing a goal and a vision that is productive. And those are the kind of heroes that she lionized in Atlas Shrugged. Some of the heroes of that novel are a steel industrialist, an inventor, people who today you wouldn't think of as heroes. But she contrasts them with the kind of parasitic business people who try to game the system through political pull and favoritism and all kinds of tax benefits and rebates, of which we have an enormous amount today. I mean, in a certain way, it's hard to tell apart the kind of producer businessman from the parasite or moocher, or as she called them, or what many people call cronies today. So
is that what they refer to, crony capitalism?
Yeah, and that is an abomination. I mean, it's really a perversion of a system, capitalism, in a direction that is more and more controlled, because the dynamics of that are it incentivizes certain businesses to demand more controls on their competitors. And it's certainly not anything that you would see in a truly capitalist system. So Ayn Rand was for capitalism as she put it, an unknown ideal for many people. It's a real moral ideal for the reasons you raised earlier, which is it allows people to be selfish in the best sense of that term. What she opposed and fought against was the kind of system we have today, which is the mixed economy, which in her view is unstable. It tends toward greater and greater control. And we've seen that in the 20th century. I mean, one of the metrics people look at is the number of pages in the Federal Register of Regulations. And it's only grown. Like the people have graphed it and it goes like this. It's massive. And that's just one sort of proxy measure for the scale of regulation. And the reason that's bad in her view is that it's government stepping in and obstructing people's ability to think and act on their best judgment. And she's opposed to that because she regards it as you should be enabling people to be free to act on their best judgment, not curbing them. And it's often because of, one of the dynamics is that it's done in the name of protecting either competition or protecting the consumer. And in her view of that is, these are not legitimate moral considerations for the economy.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.